Good afternoon. Today's discussion deals with the concept of Western civilization, the importance of it. Why do we study Western civilization? More importantly, why is it called Western civilization or Western freedoms? Looking at this week's readings, we look at Bradley Beerson, mentions uh, Christianity and how Christianity and is brought together along with European history and how European history is very important in the establishment of the Western philosophy, going back to, of course, to antiquity, talking about how the root of freedoms and liberties stem from the Greek Republic, going back as far as Plato, Aristotle, the seeking of the truth and trying to establish freedoms and democracy and demo being people and crassy rule by. We look at these and we establish a certain foundation so that we can start, generating a type of system that eventually will be incorporated into the Roman Republic, where you have more people, res publica, the public rule, and how these people are going to now have more freedoms, more established rule of law. Roman law, of course, becomes very important. And then, of course, once Christianity is established, you see the blending of the Roman, by this point in time, empire, their laws, Roman imperial laws, come into effect with Christianity, and how Christianity, of course, we look at the Gospels, the New Testament, where we're talking about compassion and life, living, loving, and following God's commandments and how important they are. They help establish Western European kingdoms. Once the Roman Empire falls, and we have what's called Christendom. And Bierster talks about that, and it's very important to really ascertain how or what was Christendom, and how is Christendom pull together what is considered Western civilization. Now, Lars Pearson makes a very good point, because we start talking about how where or whom make up Western civilization. And, it's not a homogenous group of people as we had seen with, let's say, the Ottoman Empire or other empires that are homogenous. When we talk about Western Europe and Western European powers, we're really looking at a varied type of kingdoms. Some, of course, are Frankish kingdoms, whereas others are going to be Germanic. Then we have obviously the Mediterraneans, but the concept is totally different. However, the inclusion of Roman law, which becomes embedded within some of these Frankish kingdoms, and eventually leading up to the Magna Carta, which becomes the one of the earliest foundations of our modern Western common law, which eventually the British establish, is really important, because it's important for us as Americans to understand where this whole concept of Western civilization stems from. And when we look to the West, we go as far east as Greece, even Byzantium and the Roman Empire. One of the important things that Dr. Roberts mentioned in his video was really to look at not only the course that we're undertaking here with this intellectual history class, but to really take a look at how freedoms and how they come together, how they generate, how they have become a staple within our system of government, within part of our belief system, all which is now culminated into what we Americans and Western Europeans call Western civilization. And one of those, of course, if you take a look at strictly American history, take a look at John Gast's painting of 1872, American Progress, and we take a look at, it's a highly symbolic piece of art. We start seeing how Providence is leading American civilization westward, pushing back the tide, and stretching American civilization, which of course is part of Western civilization, into the unknown. Culminating, of course, in what is known during that time period as manifest destiny. So that's very important to understand how, while Western civilization, the concept of, originates back in the Western Mediterranean, a little bit north of what is modern day Turkey, moves through, sweeping westward to the through the British Isles and eventually into the Western Hemisphere. What it encompasses and why it's important. It's central in the fact that the uniqueness, for the most part, we bring in, Christianity. Um, in elder or on olden times, we were talking about Catholicism, eventually the Protestant Reformation that became also to include inclusive of Protestants as well as Catholics, but how they have a source, and the source of the entire Western civilization goes back to the Greek system, where they had the democracy established, which is obviously a lot different than our modern interpretation of democracy. But it starts with the Greeks, stretching eventually. Of course, the Romans will also begin to utilize some of the aspects of the Greek system, and of course, they create the Republic. But it's very important because we incorporate the readings this week and we bring them together. And as a result of that, what ends up happening is we have to determine why it's important to to study Western civilization. And the importance of that is, of course, because we live in a society, a civilization that is part of Western civilization, or part of this Western society. We are the descendants of the Greeks and the Romans, or more so the legal traditions of them, as well as the European kingdoms of old back in the Middle Ages. But that is why it's really important to continue to study Western civilization. Beerson, made some very good point illustration, because he states that not all European countries were, once again, I go back, homogenous, that they were all different, separate. They had these different microcosms or kingdoms were totally different, yet we try to include them as an inclusive body of Western civilization. But I think as a result of them having systems that incorporated Roman law, partial system, partial ideas that come from the Greeks, that's what makes it, makes them part of what becomes Western civilization, and the importance of Western civilization. Thank you. Have a wonderful day.